Hello all, this is Steve from Gaming Friends. I'm ranking each game in the Silent Hill series, from worst to best, and I'm going into detail on the elements that work and those that don't. And today, I'm talking about Silent Hill Downpour. It's appropriate that the central motif of Silent Hill Downpour is rain, because it does make me a little sad when I think about it. Downpour is a genuinely ambitious project, trying to shake up the core franchise, but unfortunately it's a failed experiment. It tries to turn Silent Hill into a semi-open world with side quests, fast travel, and a bigger focus on exploration. In some ways it sort of worked. The town itself does feel more lived in than it ever did before, and you do sort of get the sense that there are other things going on that you're not seeing. Much like, a regular town. You can probably tell the issue I have with this is pretty obvious. By giving it a sense of realism, by making the game work the same way that so many other games work, it detracts from the surreal nature of the place. We're no longer in sinister Twin Peaks, where the mayor is just an abandoned, blood-stained wheelchair waiting at the altar, and every little thing that happens feels inexplicably like it's directed at you. In Downpour, we're just in a slightly shady neighbourhood on the bad side of town. All the shopkeepers are a little backwards and politically incorrect, and it's been lashing rain for days and the Wi-Fi has gone everywhere. It still feels unsettling and certainly depressing, but it also makes the player feel insignificant. In the most literal sense, more has resulted in less. Where it shines the brightest are the moments where it narrows its focus. Side quests by nature aren't necessary to the main plot, and I have to say the game signposts this very well by restricting them almost exclusively to the inside of neighbourhood houses. One such side quest saw me breaking into a house and finding signs of a young girl who went missing in Silent Hill. When I got to the basement, I discovered that she had been murdered, and that was when I suddenly got attacked by some unseen enemy who seemed to be unkillable and with an unsettling habit of giggling in the darkness. For me, that was the scariest moment in the entire game, and while it's a pretty good scare, I have issues with it. The main reason is because I don't really like side quests unless they're useful to me. If a side quest is useful, it'll give me a weapon or a health upgrade that I sorely need to progress the game. But Downpour isn't a difficult game. The challenge is mostly in just finding out where you need to go, so none of its rewards like health packs or stronger guns are actually very useful to me at all. If that's the case, why should I bother going out of my way when I can just ignore them and continue on the main story, where presumably all the best scares and best moments are? But that wasn't the case, which makes the game badly splintered. It puts too much emphasis on its optional extras, despite the fact they don't contribute very much at all. If it were me making a Silent Hill game, I would want the side quests to complement the overall gameplay experience and narrative, but without detracting from it if you didn't take part in it. I'm not sure how I'd do this, because in every Silent Hill game I've played, taking part in any sort of side quest goes against what I'd imagine the protagonist would do. You might think I'm reading too much into this, but bear in mind these are character-driven games first and foremost. A game like, say, The Legend of Zelda can have plenty of side quests because character is less important there. Link is just an avatar for the player, and the player is there largely just to have fun. In Silent Hill, the character is usually fairly complex and almost always has a narrow goal in mind, so it makes less sense for them to start running around collecting things. I can't see the character of Murphy stopping halfway through trying to escape Silent Hill just so he can gather a lot of art posters around town. It might serve the world building, but it doesn't serve the story. I wanted to see where this journey was taking him specifically, and that didn't involve stopping to smell the undead roses. What I will say is that this is far less of an issue when replaying the game. At that point, you've played through the story, so distractions are much less of an issue. I think it would have been a great idea for the side quests to only be unlocked once the game was completed, as this would give you a much better incentive to play through a second time. Unfortunately, I think the developers just looked at what was trending in other games at the moment, in this case open world environments, and tried to implement that as best they could. They almost got it right, so I'd give them a silver medal for effort. What I find a little harder to forgive is the monster design. When playing this game for the first time, I was a little surprised to find that the monster design annoyed me so much. I realised later though, while I was preparing for this video and researching the other entries, it actually makes perfect sense. The enemies in Downpour are simply the most unoriginal the series has ever seen. I'm fairly certain every monster in the game has the same number of limbs as I do and in all the same places. which is pretty fucked up. Or rather, it's not fucked up at all, which is fucked up considering this is Silent Hill, which is well known for monsters with a lot of mad and crazy limbs all over the place. For me, an ideal monster encounter in Silent Hill would usually consist of a second or two of just taking in how hideous they look, before considering whether I should run away in panic, or try and fight it, also in panic. It shouldn't play out like it does in Silent Hill Downpour, with a quick jump scare and then feeling annoyed at how bloody long it takes to kill these guys. The correlation between the character's inner demons and these monsters are usually represented in their design, and to be honest, it's just plain lazy here. The most common enemy in the game is called a prisoner minion, because Murphy was also a prisoner in jail. That's about as deep as the symbolism goes. It's a horrendous regression for the series as a whole, and I find it very hard to forgive. One thing that I don't really like doing is pointing out the technical flaws in a game, because I prefer to focus on the creative aspect. I feel like that's more important most of the time, whereas technical limitations are usually down to budgets or deadlines. I have to admit though, I got pretty distracted with glitches in this game, which really isn't a good thing considering how important immersion is in this series. Murphy's journey is a pretty janky one. There's a lot of pop-in, which I actually find really ironic. The developers of the original Silent Hill covered the streets in fog in order to hide the fact that there was a really poor draw distance. The original PlayStation could only render a small part of the game world at a time. This turned out to be really atmospheric, so they kept doing it in later games, even though they could have fixed the draw distance problem. It's funny that Downpour pretty much gets rid of the fog in favour of rain, and now a very similar problem has popped up. They got a little bit too cocky. Having said that, it probably wouldn't have hidden all the times that enemy limbs just pop through the walls on my playthrough. I'm adamant about finding something to praise in each game, however, and in this one I think it was the final boss that really stood out for me. The symbolism is pretty lazy for the most part, but I really liked how well it worked for this boss, whose name is the Wheelman. The big twist, the big secret that Murphy is hiding in the game, is that he has been accused of beating a man named Frank Coleridge into a vegetative state. Frank is an unambiguous saint who worked in Murphy's prison as a parole officer, and Murphy agrees to do this in exchange for his son's murderer, who he also kills. This monster basically represents Frank, showing what an utterly helpless and pitiful creature Murphy turned him into for the sake of vengeance. It plays nicely on the fear of incapacitation, embodying the concept in a pretty grotesque way. The size of the boss is pretty significant as well. The Wheelman is probably the biggest monster in any of the Silent Hill games. I think the reason for this is to represent the extreme degree of guilt that Murphy feels about the crime he's committed. While I really like this boss, the symbolism is spoiled a little bit by the game's epilogue. There's another quasi-boss battle here where you play as the Boogeyman, who's been chasing Murphy throughout the entire game, and you're meant to be fighting against Anne, who is Frank Coleridge's daughter and also a parole officer. There's no point dancing around it, the symbolism here gets pretty messy and lazy again. The idea is that Anne, like Murphy, is seeing monsters in Silent Hill, and she sees Murphy as the Boogeyman because of what he did to her father. But Murphy can also see the Boogeyman, and who it represents for him is ambiguous. At times, it's suggested to be Patrick Napier, the man who killed Murphy's son. Other times, it suggests that it represents Murphy himself. Ambiguity can work in a game's favour, but considering the laziness shown in other areas, I think they just used the Boogeyman as a placeholder for bad person and threw him in whenever it was necessary. This is reinforced by the fact that, depending on how the Boogeyman fight goes, it may be revealed that Murphy was framed for the attack on Frank Coleridge, which renders the Wheelman fight absolutely null and void. Even the name Boogeyman is painfully unoriginal, and his actual design lacks any creativity at all. A guy in a big coat and a gas mask. That's horror shorthand for serial killer, and the series should be well above that at this stage. It's a shame because playing as the monster is a pretty great idea, and the game is full of these great ideas. It's just a shame that none of them really worked.